Alright, so let's talk the Age of Apocalypse. This is one that I've actually been itching to review for the last month, and with good reason. It's one of my favorite X-Men stories, obviously, which is why I'm reviewing it. Obviously, my favorite story still is God Loves, Man Kills, but this one manages to stand out on its own quite well. The Age of Apocalypse, I'm not going to say that it's funny to talk about because people do trump it up as an overrated story, and a lot of people are critical to say, well, it's not really groundbreaking in any way, which, is true on both accounts. I hold its overratedness mostly because of the video game which was released in the 90s to kind of capitalize on the success of this crossover, and that's kind of how it got trumped up a little bit more. And admittedly, it's not groundbreaking in the ways that Dark Phoenix Saga or especially Days of Future Past were. I mean, the alternate timeline, the horrible dystopian future. We've seen this done in tons of things before. It's the thing about it is that it's the big significance that the story has among a lot of fans, besides the fact of how cool it was, is that this was really one of the last good stories that Marvel had in the 90s before it took that sharp decline into shittiness. Particularly, I'm thinking with Onslaught once that came along. But I'm going to say that bitching for another time. The story works so well to me in terms of epicness because it's very character driven. It's epic, which I've said already, and it's got a lot of really good allegories going on in it too. The setting of the story obviously represents the eugenics wars kind of dystopian future that I'm really afraid may actually come up in reality, which call me crazy, but I'm still kind of paranoid about that. But the story does really good with taking that setting, and the writers just seem to be really filling something with breaking the status quo and just going for something different for a change. And they obviously had a lot of fun with it. I mean, hell, Jeff Loeb wrote a couple of stories in here, and despite everybody saying that his writing is completely shit, barring the Long Halloween, he actually is pretty tolerable in this, which is surprising even on the reread. The basic gist of it is that after Apocalypse conquered North America, when the whole dystopian future built out of a future version of Legion going back in time and trying to assassinate Magneto, and his father, who was Professor Xavier, actually wound up taking the bullet for him, and Xavier's death kind of just created this catalyst, and now this fucking alternate timeline has come up. And so just seeing characters act out of the norm is really what's cool about the story. Seeing Magneto actually acting as a leader of the team is pretty cool, or is actually a pretty cool contrast to the villain that we normally see him as, especially at this time. Some of the other characters that they bring to the forefront, like Sabretooth as a good guy, are pretty cool. And we even see him become sort of a father figure to Blink, which I actually liked. And we kind of alternate with some opposites of certain characters as evil, particularly Dark Beast, who's pretty cool. So, I mean, there's just a ton of great stuff going on in the story. It's the X-Men with, a little bit of Blade Runner combined with the epicness of Game of Thrones. It's fucking fun. And especially with all the miniseries that come out to it. Now, a lot of times, miniseries or crossovers come out in comic books, and you have a lot of the tie-ins that go along with it. The Infinity Gauntlet had that thing going on in the tie-ins, which, admittedly, all of them were not relevant to the story, but they still had something to contribute, which was pretty good for you to be able to read and get your bang for your buck. But here, I got to go back to the Game of Thrones reference, because with each turn that we take with the way that the issues are laid out in the completed trades. It actually, we're kind of taking the Game of Thrones point of views and just, you get to visit with somebody for a little while and then go off and take a break, and it just, the way that the story sets itself up and once the finale plays out just works so well with how intricately woven it is. Um, I really dig the Excalibur series that they did with Nightcrawler, because basically he's having to go and take his mother to a certain place to find Destiny, who can actually tell whether or not Bishop, who's come back from an alternate future and is explaining to Magneto and the rest of the X-Men that the world that they know is actually an alternate timeline. The Weapon X stories are pretty terrific. I actually like seeing Logan attempting to fight with a handicap a lot of times, and he does pretty good. And even shows Donald Pierce that he's still pretty badass motherfucker, even though he has that stump. I thought the series focusing on Scott Summers and Havoc being sort of the adopted sons of Sinister was pretty cool. There's some really good character stuff done with them. And we even get to explore sort of the darker premonitions of the jealousy of Havoc to Cyclops and just how their relationship completely falls apart in this story. I really enjoyed the Blink miniseries at the end of the first volume. She's kind of, I think this was the story that she was actually introduced in, although I might be wrong about that, but there's kind of this alternate take, which she winds up going off and she ends up teleported to this different planet, and she winds up where it's revealed that she winds up having to help fight and eventually fall in love with an alternate version of Annihilus, which was pretty cool. And that's good. I absolutely enjoyed the Generation Next story, to where they were having to deal with the Sugar Man. I'm not really crazy about Chris Bachalo's artwork, especially right now on when he's doing Wolverine and the X-Men, just from how clunky that it looks. But within the context of the Age of Apocalypse Generation Next miniseries, it's really good. It does still have that kind of clunky cartoon feel to it, but it's actually pretty unique with the way that it's laid out, and it looks like the X-Men crossed with Where the Wild Things Are, and it's sort of told in this children's storybook fashion, which just looks really awesome. I think probably the biggest thing that I would have a problem with, I'm not going to say that it's bad, but it's just my least favorite. Definitely Gambit in the Externals. I mean, we see some pretty cool action with them going up against the Shi'ar guards and the Starjammers and all that, but just my least favorite of the series out of all this. And then when we get to the final battle, I mean, like, we have build up with everything just eventually falling apart, Sinister turning on Apocalypse, Cyclops and Havoc basically getting ready to turn on each other. The X-Men are actually the interesting thing with the relationship blooming in between this version of Rogue and Magneto was pretty cool. And especially the ending where it's very emotional. Concerning like all the characters, which you go through 3 volumes of setup, but you get a really good ending, I feel. The only thing that I hate is that it wrapped up pretty quick. The fight in between Magneto and Apocalypse at the end, it did go on, but then it ended very quickly, I will say. Magneto defeated him way too easily. It borders... Okay, well, it doesn't border. It falls very close into anticlimactic, but, I mean, still, just the journey to get to there, and it's really good. There's a ton of stuff that I can say about this. You know, Lowe's writing is good. The artwork is good in here. Besides Bachalo, I'd really have to favor Andy Kubert's art, especially for the way that he draws that feral-looking Wolverine. As I said, this is a story that's not groundbreaking in any way for its alternate timelines. Um, it just happens to be a good story that came out in the 90s before Marvel turned completely to shit. Um, Best crossover out of the 90s, and it still ages pretty well. Um, I think maybe because like a lot of people complain that the Marvel stories, or at least the X-Men stories, don't age well, a la Extinction Agenda. I'll grant that it doesn't age well, but I still like it. I actually think that this would probably be my favorite X-Men story out of the 90s. Um, if it wasn't, if I didn't hold it up as well as I did, I'd probably say that it would come as a close tie in between this and Fatal Attractions. But it is still my favorite X-Men story of the 90s. If you are absolutely looking for something to get into with the X-Men, obviously I would not recommend that you start here. I'll read you about 3 or 4 different stories, and then kind of come back and check this out, and check out some alternate takes on a lot of the characters. If you're a person who used to read stories back in the day, kind of grown up in the 90s, but gotten out of comics, and you want to go back and go for some good nostalgia, go back and read this story. It certainly has a lot of terrific appeal to it. The one thing that I would advise, though, there is recently a large omnibus which was released. It goes for about $100. Beautiful looking hardcover. The only problem with it is that it calls itself the Complete Age of Apocalypse Omnibus, but I've actually read a few reviews and heard from at least one person who bought it that it's missing quite a few issues that would kind of explain some things. So you would be buying a good piece, but you wouldn't be getting the entire story. You want the entire story. Buy the four trades for the Complete Age of Apocalypse Epic. The prelude to it is optional, but overall, do yourselves a favor and check the story out. It's really, really good.